It's right through the most elite literature. It's not crazy stuff. And that's just part of general consciousness. And you take a look at Israel, it's a settler colonial society. It's an advanced culture of Europeans coming into this land, eliminating the barbarians who don't belong there in the first place. And there's a kind of a natural sympathy that developed. I mean, I think all of these are factors that shouldn't be ignored. How deep they are is another question. But you could have said the same with South Africa. In fact, it was true with South Africa. There was a very natural association with South Africa as another settler colonial society. And there's a natural kind of sympathy in white America with white nationalist racism. It was real. And nevertheless, the U.S. did change policy.
You kind of just started talking about the comparison to South Africa. In the beginning of your speech, you said that the comparisons are often questionable, and I was wondering if you could explain
why,
which ones are questionable and why.
I really don't think it's a very good comparison. First of all, in the case of Israel, there's two questions. One is Israel itself, and secondly, the occupied territories. Israel itself is a discriminatory society. And there's plenty of discriminatory laws. I've been writing about them for years. But it's nothing like apartheid. In fact, it's more like the United States has been through much of its history, and still to some extent is. So it's bad, and it should be overcome, and there are things to say about it, but it's not apartheid. On the other hand, when you get to the occupied territory, it's much worse than apartheid. Much worse. Just remember, white South Africa needed a black population. They were its workforce. Just like the slave states in the South needed the black population. That's the workforce. Think of it. And if you need, in fact, if you go back to the Civil War, it's worth reading the debates. They're not. I mean, the slave owners had arguments. They thought they were right, and they justified their position. And they had arguments, and they never really answered. So, for example, to be anachronistic, if I own a car and you rent the same car, and we come back a year later, which one's going to be in better shape? Well, mine will. Since I own it, I'll take care of it. You don't own it, so if it gets dented or something happens, you won't do anything. Well, that's the slave owner's argument. We own our workforce. You rent them. So we take care of our workforce. You don't. You can just toss them out. It's called wage labor. You rent them. You don't want them anymore, you toss them out. You have no responsibility for them. So we're the ones who are moral, and you're immoral. Well, you might think about whether there's an answer to that. Anyhow, that was essentially the South African white stand. We take care of the Bantu stands because we need them. And in fact, to some extent they did. There was some development of the Bantu stands, partly for this reason, partly because they were trying to make them enough of a showcase so that the world would recognize them. On the other hand, Israel had absolutely no need or interest in the domestic population in the West Bank. Perfectly happy to get rid of them all. It's the nuisance, So they don't take care of them, they don't support them. I mean, they're just a nuisance, get rid of them. I mean, they used to use them as a workforce years ago, but that ended quite a while ago. Partly because it ended because of the success of what's called neoliberalism. And neoliberalism is the set of policies that the U.S. and its allies imposed on much of the world through the World Bank and the IMF and the World Trade Organization and so on. They're very highly regarded. If you've taken economics courses, they'll tell you how wonderful it is. But in fact, it practically devastated the societies. And it left a huge number of people, a couple of million. One of the reasons why there's so much immigration from Mexico, there are others, but that's one. As this plagues got spread around the world, Israel was able to get very cheap labor from Thailand, Latin America, Romania, Actually, their favorites were from China. It wasn't neoliberalism there, but the favorites, they're called slave labor. It's virtually what they were, contract labor. They take away their passports, they're under the control of the contractor who brings them in. Now, the beauty of China was that Chinese labor was that if they ever protested, so like maybe they wanted their wages paid or something, you could just call in the Chinese embassy, and the Chinese embassy would lay down the law. You see, you shut up, or we're going to send you back to China, and you know what's going to happen to you there. So that was a nice arrangement. But as long as they have that cheap semi-slave workforce, they don't need Palestinians anymore. So Palestinians, they more or less have to take care of. In any event, in the occupied territories, I think it's a lot worse than apartheid. And there was nothing in the Bantustans that's treated, say, like that, or even the West Bank. So in two respects, I don't think it's a valid analogy. But there is a valid analogy, I think, namely the one I mentioned. That's almost never discussed because there's one taboo topic in the United States and in the West generally, namely actual power. The actual power of the United States and its allies and the way they run the world is kind of taboo. You're not supposed to talk about that. So that's sort of excluded, although it's the core issue, maybe because it's the core issue.